Okay, hello everyone. Good morning for those who are joining from the Americas. Good afternoon for those who are joining from Europe. Welcome to another ELTA live event. A heads up, this event is going to be recorded and it's streaming live as we speak. So if you don't like that, please switch off. If you don't know who we are the European Legal Tech Association, and you can look us up at elta.org. That's ELTA.org. Well, no self-respecting legal tech association can dodge the topic of generative AI and its impact on the business of law today. So we thought that we assemble a dream team of domain experts that have looked into AI long before November 30, 2022. And it is my pleasure to have with us 5 experts, 3 from the US and Canada and 2 from Europe, that are ready to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio in that discussion about AI. But enough from me. I give the floor to Tom Martin, who agreed to take over the role of moderator. Tom, over to you.
Thank you so much, Holger, and I really appreciate you bringing us all together. We have a fantastic, as you put it, I agree, a dream team of everyone to give their opinion about the impact of generative AI on the legal business. I think all of us have been, and let's see if we could put a highlight or spotlight on the crew here. But I think all of us have seen this tidal wave of AI building for many years now, and it seems to finally be hitting all at once. It's been one breathless innovative success to another. It seems like we get an announcement about some new functionality or ability of AI almost every week, if not more often than that, from ChatGPT dropping in November to having plugins shortly thereafter that, GPT-4, and now Auto GPT. There's a lot to keep up with. So let me introduce to you our expert panelists. First, let's start with the Americans. We got Natalie Knowlton, who is the founder of Access to Justice Ventures. We have Dazza Greenwood, who is the founder of civics.com and the executive director of law.mit.edu. And from Europe, we have Alexander Tolkanov. He is counsel of AI, data, and digital policy. And then we also have Henrik Vers, who is the head of legal technology at Allen & Overy Europe. And he is he's there in transport right now and has an amazing signal for the German transport there. So very excited to get this conversation started, and there's a lot for us to cover. I think the first part that makes the most sense is not to assume anything. Let's figure out how this thing works. Let's talk a little bit about ChatGPT, GPT-4. What are some use cases? What is it? And is it a good thing? So first off, let's start with Henrik. Tell us a little bit about your experience of that and what do you think it's good for?
I think at least it's good for that this really pushes all the other legal tech interest and enthusiasts at the moment, because that certainly gives it an additional push to sometimes a bit of outdated legal tech strategies and thoughts. So I think that's a good new push to the whole setup and system of legal technology as such. Being on transport, I'm brief here now, but should exit in a minute. So I'll be longer in the next answer.
Fantastic. And Dazza, I think you have looked into this quite a bit with prompting and all that. So share with us some use cases and ideas that you think ChatGPT is good for.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. So I think the way you asked the question was about ChatGPT, and I will answer that, but I'd like to just broaden it, at least the thinking a little bit, to make sure everyone's aware to distinguish ChatGPT, which is a service of a company, OpenAI, and it's a chat service. And it's an example of a type of technology that's generative AI. And there are other examples of this chat interface where you like type something in, you get something out. But there's a lot of other ways to do it. And some of those are actually the type of capabilities that drive other legal use cases. So I use it all the time when I'm trying to get a first draft. And that includes for legal instruments and even for other types of legal, I guess I could call it legal processes. It's also really good at summarizing, which is something that happens a lot in the law and in government and in consulting. You get these, huge meaty sets of documents and you need a quick scan of it. It's pretty good at summarizing and quickly classifying. But there's so much more that can happen when it's part of a workflow. And that's why I was mentioning generative AI and separating it from the chat interface. So I use the APIs a lot. And then there's a lot of other companies beyond OpenAI that offer these things as well. And so that's just a quick look at some of the ways that you can use it and some of the applications to law and legal processes.
Awesome. Natalie, I know you've looked at more of the direct to consumer. Like, how do you think this could help us with that?
Sure. And just by way of background, my expertise is really in that area of law in the US, the direct to consumer space, where there aren't a lot of lawyers and there aren't law as a business is kind of disintegrated in this space. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. In terms of use cases, let's focus specifically on how legal consumers might use these tools, and whether or not they should use these tools is irrelevant because they will be using these tools. One of the most important things that I see, and I'll focus specifically on ChatGPT here, is the ability to provide people who are looking for legal information with a framework for how to approach a process. So almost every time that I've put in prompts to ChatGPT with respect to I'm getting a divorce or help me walk through an eviction, you'll see this information architecture that comes out, and it's step by step. And that really conceptually, we know, helps consumers think about the broad flow of their case and what they need to do from step to step. But it also provides a framework for further research. The research that I've done and others shows that legal consumers, when they're looking for information online, which online information is already imperfect, they're doing research. They're starting from one spot, going to another. And so I think the framework and this kind of information architecture, step-by-step process flow that you're seeing in ChatGPT specifically is really going to help people on that research front. Also, the simplification. I did a demo the other day, and I went to a jurisdiction in the United States that is traditionally very heavy on Latin, very difficult for litigants without lawyers to understand. And I highlighted a piece of that and put it into ChatGPT and asked it to summarize it, and it did. And it did a fine job, at least with respect to what the consumer would need to know about that information. So I think on the consumer end, there are a lot of opportunities here.
Yeah, there's definitely that disintermediation that's happening where lawyers have been, up until now, really the gatekeepers of this highly specialized information, even in Latin, to make it even less accessible. And now the consumers have an easier way to access it. So Alexander, tell us what your thoughts are about what this technology is good for, how it can help us. And I can share your slide if you'd like. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
So I hope it's being seen, right? So the slide. Okay, yep. So great. So hello everyone. I just wanted to briefly give you a broader idea, not about purely legal use cases which might be there of this kind of technology. But I suggest you to inform yourself about the Barak-Turovsky's work on the framework, how we could actually evaluate the generative AI use cases. And there might be a way of thinking about it in 3 dimensions, so to say, in Barak's words. We can think about different applications differing in terms of the required accuracy of the output, how accurate it needs to be, and fluency, On the other hand, how natural sounding or looking it needs to be, the output. And also, of course, in terms of impact, how high stakes or low stakes scenario are we, what kind of scenario are we considering in terms of risks for ourselves, for other people, for organizations, for the society, for the right, so all kinds of this thing, all kinds of things. And in this sense, broadly, we could delineate between two buckets of use cases. One bucket would be the productivity use cases, which you see here in mostly in the low accuracy, high fluency area, but a little bit with one bit towards the high accuracy one side. And the decision support use cases, which tend to be usually in more high accuracy part of the chart, which you can see. Because if you are talking about, decision support for legal decision making, business decision making, it needs to be usually highly accurate information, either purely automatically generated or as validated by the user, which I think might be the case in particular for many legal use cases, which we are now discussing here, because those high accuracy cases also tend to be higher stakes in terms of their impact, as you also see on the chart. Like if you have some consumer recommendations driven by this technology, you're asking the bot or other technology to recommend you something. Okay, you have this kind of impact that may be personally affecting you, and it may be even influential for yourself. But let's imagine you are asking advice or asking a generative AI to draft a legal memorandum for you, as I've already heard, one of the colleagues is using this for coming up with some first drafts of something, right? So this needs to be more high quality work because it potentially may affect someone, right, down the road. So in this sense, we clearly see so that there might be some issues and some there is some potential, of course, with this tech, but also some issues in terms of how mature it needs to be for this for each particular use case and for each bucket of cases. So as we now see right now, if you see what's going on the internet, it's mostly around productivity use cases, I would say. Like the people are feeling more confident in whatever they are doing, which is maybe fiction writing. I already saw some writers asking ChatGPT for outlines already in December, right? I mean, it does need to be factual, so no problem with that. But on the other hand, when you are asking generative AI system to come up with some advice, maybe even, legal advice. Yeah, I tried it out on the previous version of the ChatGPT, not the one which they currently have available in a subscription mode, but previously I tried it out with several questions on. I think I was trying to figure out the fair use jurisprudence in the United States, and I knew some cases already. I knew what they were about, so for me as an expert, it was easier to test what was going to be provided to me. But so I asked ChatGPT to give me some examples, and the thing is, it came up with the correct decisions which were relevant for the prompt I gave, but the answer was totally wrong, like 180 degrees wrong in terms of the verdict, what has happened, and so on. So and this is the issue with I would say with the high accuracy cases like ours, like in the legal domain. But I will not, I will not dwell on it too much. Just a quick step in from.
Thank you, Alexander. And I actually see that Henrik is in place. So I think a lot of people would be interested to see, you know, how Harvey is getting utilized. So I could share those slides for you if that'll help. All right, let me pull that up.
Thank you, Tom. And as a disclaimer, I must not show and share anything from and of Harvey at the moment. So this is only a diagram. So what we realize here, what we see is that in terms of generative AI, we have been using translation quite often. Currently, we use a lot of text classification. I'll come to that in a second. And at the moment, we certainly, as Daza already mentioned, work a lot with summarization. Further on the right are the things that might come into action from a law firm's perspective soon. I mean, certainly we work on question answering as well, but audio classification, let's say, for example, for court hearings is something we work on, but it's not in production yet. So the example I'm showing now is something we can use Harvey for. We could use any other language model for. And that's about text classification. So Tom, if you directly jump onto the next slide, thank you. We see that for one of our products, we need to clarify and classify a bunch of law, whether it comes from Europe or anywhere in the world, and we could now discuss whether that's generative AI, how we're using it, because we're not actually producing texts here, but we are only using it for slicing it into pieces. And as you see in the third part of that diagram, we get the results and quite a bit of an clarity which class of text that could be. In reality, that means if we come up with a new law from anywhere, we are able with that tool to classify it without actually reading it. That could be a law about anti-money laundering from Japan, for example, and therefore we directly have that classification, and we are 95% sure that we know what's that law about without asking our colleagues in Japan, for example. Is that generative AI? We could discuss that because we are not creating anything here, but we're just throwing it into the machine and getting that result. Okay, that should be that. But it generated at least that classification that you see with that small Harvey balls on the right side here. And maybe the question regarding use of Harvey, I won't get to percentage of use, but most use is certainly research, question answering, and summarization, as I mentioned before. This text classification topic is a less used use case, but I think quite a practical one for a lot of law classification.
Well, that's great. And one thing I want to emphasize for everyone is that there are many different applications of this technology. You can use it to generate text, as we all know, but also the extraction that Henrik was talking about. And also not to misperceive it as a factual recovery system. It's not a knowledge system. It is a language model. So what it is doing is trying to provide you with information, trying to provide a textual response that is responsive to what you're asking for. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be factually accurate, but I think what we miss in insisting on factual accuracy is the fact that it can provide such a good, well-crafted, humanly intelligible response. And so if you take that technology and you plug it in to sources of data that are accurate, it does a phenomenal job in summarizing that information, synthesizing it. And so that's the real gift here. That's the value, is that you can use these systems to get answers quickly from accurate data sources. So with that, would like to move on to our next topic, which has to do with the Goldman Sachs report, I think that we're all aware of. It was, a bit of a shock, got us all a bit concerned, talking about 44% of, jobs within the legal industry that could be automated or taken over by AI. And that feeds into the whole fear that we have about robots taking over. But I'd like to jump into that a little bit and talk about like what are the assumptions, the details underlying that report, and what it means really for us. Daza, how about you take a stab at that?
Sure, thanks. I'd be happy to. And yeah, I've been seeing a lot of reports as people try to grapple in different sectors of the economy and from different vantage points about what is the impact going to be of generative AI on work and on society in general. And when I read through that report, I took it to be more of kind of struggling out loud to think about what's going to be a very unpredictable future at this point. And I thought it was constructive. I don't think any of us should take it as a precise calculation of what is likely to happen or why, but I think it's a good contribution to a conversation we all need to be having as we reckon with what the implications of this are. The first thing that struck me is, well, let me just put it another way. There's what I would consider at this point almost like not an old adage, but a new adage, which is the effect of generative AI on law practice isn't so much that it's going to be replacing lawyers. It's more that attorneys and legal practices that are good at using generative AI are likely to replace those that are not good or that are not learning how to do it, and also what its limitations are. And so I think there will be a real competitive advantage. I think it's going to replace types of legal work, not necessarily a person who is now going to be able to focus on other aspects of legal work and maybe bring even more value as they're supercharged by this technology. And then, of course, there's the other thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of people right now that are underserved or unserved. And I think Natalie can speak more on this even than I can. But when you look at access to justice, and you as well, Tom, and many others, there's a huge unmet need here that can start to be filled by this technology, which isn't replacing any attorney. It's filling a market need that's currently underserved. And so I think there's a lot of more subtle implications of this. And the most important thing is even the word "this" is a moving target. There are innovations already, I'm seeing, I live in the Bay Area now, that are not yet like fully public, that are in the pipeline, they're coming soon, and they're going to completely change again and again what the capabilities are that we have. So we have a dynamic, fast evolving set of capabilities here, and that makes it even more confounding to predict what the outcomes are going to be writ large. So I mean, what's changing isn't what we've seen yet. The capabilities are going to continue to evolve quickly over at least the foreseeable future. So let's try to grapple with the changes happening now first and put a little bit less emphasis on making serious binding plans on the future at this point, I would say.
Natalie, what do you think about that? I mean, the statistic, right, is that 80% of people, at least in the United States, don't have access to justice. So impliedly from that, they're not getting attorney assistance. So the attorneys would not be put out of work for that need to be actually met at some point. So what do you think about this narrative that lawyers are going to be put out of work?
In the consumer space in the US, and Tom, the statistics are different, and we can debate about some of the statistics, but it is not an understatement to say that a lot of people need legal help and don't have it or can't afford it or don't want to pay for the current options. And I think in that space in particular, because of those statistics, lawyers have already been put out of business, and some will argue they put themselves out of business. Others argue that there are compounding factors. The law is expensive, courts are expensive. But there are not lawyers in many of these cases, and so they are not really in this conversation. And it's not just AI that has done that to them. It's the information that has been put online over the last several decades, the additional resources that courts are now pouring into this issue and serving people. So legal information is fair game for anyone to provide, and courts are stepping in to do that in the absence of attorneys. So I think this is just going to perpetuate that trend that we're already seeing in the consumer space, where consumers are having to go to different sources, and different sources are stepping up to assist where attorneys would traditionally have been in that space.
Cool. And Alexander, I know you had some thoughts specifically about the Goldman Sachs report and some of the incorrect assumptions it might have been making. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, sure. So I remember some coverage about this report, and also the lawyer replacement thing, which we already mentioned. But really, if you dive deeper into the report itself, it doesn't say so. For example, it mentions a certain categories of use cases, concrete tasks, which could be, according to Goldman Sachs, automated or not using this current technology. And it gives a score, they give a score of up to 7 in terms of complexity. And let's say, if you take a look at, I think, what's the page? So it doesn't matter. So it's somewhere there. It says that, for example, to make a ruling in a court on a complicated motion, this level of this kind of tasks, it has a 6 level of complexity, while whatever is possible with this tech is only like 4 or under. So meaning that it will not be able to automate this kind of task, for example, even according to their own assumptions, which I'm not sure like how optimistic they are or whatever. So just we need to read the straight down the fine print, I think.
Great. So if I understand, like some of the way that they broke down what would be subject to automation versus not is pretty arbitrary, and whether or not you could actually automate those things that they think you could is really up for debate.
Yeah, for debate, there are some reasonable considerations, like reviewing a form is has a complexity score of 1, maybe court case maybe a 6, but who knows? Maybe it's a 76. I don't know.
And also, you know, what interest does Goldman Sachs have and experience in saying what can be automated of legal tasks? But
yeah.
That's another for another day. Henrik, do you have any thoughts about this in terms of the report or the prediction that people are going to be out of business?
I mean, I like numbers, I like statistics, and especially the number 44% sticks in my mind. But I think I was asked today if I'd like to predict the next 15 years, and I said I even don't want to predict the next 15 months. So I'm really careful with any prediction. I mean, I read it all, and I like that people come to these numbers, but I have to say, I mean, and pretty much we might be laughing about what we were talking about in this webinar in 3 months' time, because it's going so quickly, and I fear that we all don't understand and know that exponential growth we are in at the moment with the approach and the progress of AI. Therefore, I'm really careful in any forecast or anything. I mean, I like it, reading it, and I see there'll be a huge change in the work we all do. But currently, and certainly I'll be the one who'll be ashamed of what I say now in 3 months' time. But I'm actually rather looking forward to it, because I see so much inefficiencies we still have, and I'd really like to tackle them better and have more problems, new problems in the future, rather than saying, oh, we shouldn't do that. That's all dangerous. So currently, I'm still with all alerts, with all disclaimers we read about in the past, I'm still on the very pro and positive side of it. but there might be that one turning point at a point in time, but I don't know. Therefore, I'd say, and this is what we tell our lawyers at the moment with Huawei, use it, embrace it, own it like a calculator to really know what we are doing. And then we'll see in 3 months' time, in a year's time, where we are. It will be certainly somewhere completely different than we currently assume, and Goldman Sachs assumes.
Definitely, it's one of those things where you learn by doing, and by using this technology. I think we're all getting accustomed to what it could be used for, and that is only changing over time. So you have to jump in to swim, and that's what we're doing here. But you did mention some of the risks, and I think that's worth talking about. There's and we can dedicate a good amount of time to that, because there certainly are some risks. I think partly from my experience, one big risk is just having the wrong mindset about it. So if you approach it, so it's not necessarily the technology, it's a matter of what your frame of mind is. If you approach this technology with the mindset that it is a push button perfect solution, that you ask for something and that you should get exactly perfectly what you're asking for, that's a mistake. That if you look at it more as a collaborative process with a technology that can assist you in getting to the end that you want, the result that you want eventually, that's a healthy mindset for this technology. So if we approach it that way, we'll probably set our expectations in a range that's much more reasonable and reachable. So with that said, though, we're free to talk about, technical shortcomings, about like all of the different problems that we've seen with it. Alexander, I'll go to you because I just want to give you credit. There's this fantastic flowchart. We don't have it available right now, but basically it's like a logic tree that says whether or not it's safe to use ChatGPT. And so there's sometimes it might not be safe. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So first of all, I would be viewing it from sort of an Aristotelian perspective, like we can overuse, abuse technology, any bit of it. We can underuse it, it will also be bad. So the optimal scenario be using it in moderation and with reason in mind. And this is what I was thinking about when I came with this chart, which propagated some time ago. Basically, the idea is, I totally agree with your approach. Basically, if you're perceiving these tools as something that would serve as an oracle of wisdom, I mean, you are in a bad place. But instead, if you are considering it as a kind of a useful assistant, which these tools usually are, and I mean, this is a much better scenario. Although I would note that in order to judge the output, you need to be really an expert on whatever you are asking about, or you need to at least have some critical reasoning skills to assess this output, as you would assess any kind of information you obtain from Google, right? So you don't necessarily trust whatever whatever first link you get in Google results for addressing your medical emergency, right? So you usually would be thinking about like how you approach this. And the same thing goes with those generative AI tools and chatbots. I think this is the same scenario should be now in mind, just to be mindful that if we are not experts in what we are asking about, let's say a chatbot, then we have no capacity to judge whether the output is correct or not. We will need to assess the output, not blindly, like not trust it blindly, but assess it alongside other information and human expert knowledge and so on. And also, from an organizational perspective, what I would be thinking about also is, usually what we are being pitched on technological conferences, like how can you automate this, how you can automate that. this is not the first step you need to take really if you are in an organization. You should be thinking about your business processes, I would suggest, in this way. So you need first to consider where each particular business process you are wondering about can be eliminated at all. Like it's nonsensical, maybe it needs not to exist. Okay, then another step would be to consider how you can optimize it, right? And only then, if you have done those two steps, either eliminate it or not, optimize it or not, there is no capacity maybe for it, then you should consider, only then you should consider automation. Because if you don't do this way, don't do it this way, I can give you a very fresh example. In the science reports, it's a Nature Group journal, it's not Nature itself. There was this recent publication about this new approach to validating the results of a polygraph assessment by machine learning. But if you ask scientists who are actually really knowledgeable in the subject, they will say to you that polygraph assessment is bad science simply, right? So there is no benefit in the organization in automating or trying to validate human reviewers who you are using polygraph via machine learning tools or something like that. There's no sense. They need to have, they should have eliminated this process as nonsensical and harming people. So I would suggest like this three-step approach to be taken.
I think that's really valuable. Thank you, Alexander. So Natalie, I'd like to go to you, and I could share that slide. I think it's really fantastic. Hold on a second. There we go. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. So I don't mean to be flippant by putting this out there, but I do think it's worth talking about in the context of what accuracy means for specifically my field, the direct-to-consumer space in the US. You'll see a lot of the, look at the human column, a lot of the criticism that has been levied against, and I use ChatGPT here specifically, not as a replacement for generative AI broadly. But it's inaccurate, information is incomplete, outdated, misleading, biased, irrelevant, it lies. I just want to compare, though, that side by side. So online content now, which is what people had before ChatGPT was a thing and that people talked about in households. Litigants were looking for information online. They were looking at imperfect information, incomplete information, information that had nothing to do with their jurisdiction, potentially didn't have anything to do with their case type, might have been absolutely wrong. So we're not coming from this perfect space where consumers without attorneys had access to perfect information. So, status quo is really important when we're talking about whether or not the net benefit of ChatGPT and other tools it can increase consumer access. And then the human column, as Daza pointed out, I think this is important too. A lot of people get their information from friends and family. And while we may sit here as legal professionals and think, well, I'm certainly not going to go down the street and ask my neighbor how to get a divorce, that happens all the time. And we need to be honest about that. So humans are inaccurate. They give incomplete information. It's outdated. They don't know what they're talking about. Even if they're an attorney, they're still biased. That's one thing that I harp on all the time, and particularly with respect to judges and lawyers, because humans are biased and judges and lawyers are humans and they are biased. And we have the original black box algorithm sitting on the bench in jurisdictions across the country, but people don't seem to want to talk about that when they're talking about how to compare it to these new generative AI tools. So point of this whole slide is just that it is absolutely imperfect, but there is no source of perfect information out there, and particularly when you're dealing with people who don't have an attorney, and the attorney is a source of more perfect information, but nothing is inherently perfect.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I love that slide. It's fantastic. I think it just seems to be human nature that whenever there's a new technology, we just expect perfection of it, and then we go through loops of learning what it's actually useful for, and that's what we're going through right now. And so, Dazza, I'd like to go to you because I know that you had some similar thoughts about this.
Yes, thanks. And can I steal your slide, Natalie? That's so on point. And do you mind if I screen share for a moment to show
Yeah,
those?
please.
Okay. I think it's very notable. First of all, is this coming through? Yep.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Got it.
It's notable that that using this technology is really different than using other technologies. I'd say, number one, and when you and it's fair to say attorneys are using this technology now all the time. Attorneys have access to web browsers unless these ports and sites are locked out. People are using them, and I think that's generally good. There's a lot of good, valuable, productive use of this technology, and yet we haven't yet completely come to terms with how to address some of the limits and flaws in the technology in terms of guidance to attorneys. And so this first link is just to an article that's mentioning how few law firms, virtually none, currently have guidance to attorneys on how to use or how not to use this technology as part of the practice. For that reason, MIT's launched a task force about a month ago now on the responsible use of AI for law and legal processes. And we'll be coming out with an initial set of draft principles and guidelines with some commentary for public comment shortly. But for the moment, let me just give you sort of a best of. This is like my sort of back pocket hit list of things to keep an eye on, specifically in the context of attorneys. And Natalie and others have mentioned some of this, but so we have in one place. One thing that comes even before the list is the relationship with the client and what the client knows about the tools the attorneys is using and the process. And this is so new at this point, having some sort of client consent, there's a risk of not telling the client or not having the client really on board with what's happening. Prompt quality has been mentioned a little bit already, but it's garbage in, garbage out, times 1,000 with this technology. It's very sensitive to the specifics, the words you use and the nuances in the prompt can dramatically change the output. I seriously commend everyone to become familiar with prompt engineering as the best way to combat this risk, and then go the next level with legal prompt engineering if you want, where you can learn more about that at law.mit.edu/AI or civics.com/AI. There's a ticking time bomb, I think, with intellectual property and to some extent with personally identifiable data that is kind of infused in the training sets, and that is sometimes prone to come out and raises some questions about possible future litigation. And there's existing litigation already fighting out rights to that. Natalie said it lies. Right now, I'm tending not to use words that anthropomorphize the technology, even though we're giving it names and it's very easy to do. But I would say fabrication in terms of it being like factually incorrect. And then weirder still is confabulation, when it sort of draws this whole narrative and has this set of assumptions when you're going back and forth that may themselves be incorrect, but like incredibly engaging and confident. There's already a defamation suit related to some of the incorrect information. And when you have these things talk to you, could there be slander? Who knows? Understanding the legal reasoning and the citation is critical. Some of this gets back to accuracy, but it's a little bit of a different zone. And the people say hallucination. Again, I think that anthropomorphizes, but when it starts inventing sites that would be great if they existed, but they don't, I think a better word is hallucitation, which is people are starting to talk about. Then you get to like the customary duties, confidentiality. You don't want to leak proprietary, sensitive, protected information to external enterprises if you're not supposed to be doing that. And it's really easy to do in the prompt. In fact, one of the ways to get better prompt quality is to give more facts and context. And so there could be a serious balance to be struck here with confidentiality when you're doing that. Duty of loyalty is more subtle. I'll get into that more when we release our guidelines, but but we have an interest as attorneys to really zealously advocate for the interests and the priorities of our clients. And if you just ask for a contract or some legal instrument, you may get a good output as a first draft. But one of the filters that's needed is to look at what are the implicit assumptions and priorities and interests that are being reflected in the output you get. And it may favor the buyer, it may favor the seller, it may favor a big organization or this or that. There's always some bias in everything. Is that an alignment with the interests of your client? And so that it may not be, and frequently it's not. So that's like another subtle type of cognitive filter we have to use. You can handle this one too, again, with prompt quality. You can just tell it what interest to favor and what persona to regard. But nonetheless, these are some risks. I'll just end by saying beyond attorneys, I think we're in for a big identity, a bunch of things that flow from identity. When did something source from generative AI? And to whom do we attribute things? This is already starting to happen with very customized malware and deep fakes. Prompt injection is something that's huge. I don't know who's familiar with SQL injection here, but people are already starting to create a new attack vector by in various ways, maybe putting invisible text in web pages or in other paths that are going into the output of an AI. To then basically distort or add new prompts that you weren't familiar with, and just Google prompt injection. There's a lot there. And at some point, Tom, before we hang up, we should at least clue people into the fact that one of the innovations I was mentioning earlier when I said there's stuff in the pipeline that some people haven't heard of yet is autonomous wrappers of this technology. So Auto GPT, Baby AGI, Microsoft Jarvis, and others are sort of supercharging the existing technology in ways that are going to be legally fraught in terms of attribution and accountability and a bunch of other legal issues that are about to arise. And so that's a quick skip across the top of the waves of risks for the unwary. So be wary. This doesn't mean don't use the technology. Don't just be afraid. Be aware, be educated, embrace the technology and use it wisely.
Thank you, Deza. And I I really appreciate that outline. It's I agree with you that identity and attribution are going to become so critical. They're very old school concepts with publishing and researching and providing that reference back that I think is going to become the old is going to become new again, especially with so much new text and information available to us. And I love the hallucitation concept for sure. That's definitely happening. So Henrik, I'd like to ask you about the same thing. I think especially with Alan and Overy having experience with Harvey, and I'm not saying per se that there's any risk with Harvey, but you've had hands-on experience of using this within the law firm context. And so what are some concerns or things that you've been looking at that perhaps the firm's been looking at to keep its eye on?
I think it's a lot of education at the moment, that we really let the people know what they should do. And certainly it's a lot of policies. I mean, we cannot simply roll it out and use it, but it's a lot of policies and how we can use it and can make best use of it. Strangely, at the moment, there seems to be a bit of an appetite by our clients to even push more of their data into Harvey or of any solution and say, no, why can't you use it? And we say, let's be careful here, because I would say we have been using it long enough that we are not in a full experimental level anymore here. But honestly, for all the lawyers who are using it, we are not in full production yet. So this is why we are really careful what we put in there, and that every time we put in more sensitive data, we certainly look at it before doing so. And yeah, to keep it short, I think it's a lot about policies, and we already have that with different other solutions on the internet, where we had to tell our people to use it very carefully. And but learn while doing so. So and the example I gave before with the law, slicing it into chunks and getting out what is it about, that's an easy task because it's publicly available data that's basically on the internet, but only not crawled by the tools themselves necessarily, because they're out fresh. So quite often we work with publicly available data at the moment to not jump into any of these risks mentioned, and they're there, and they will be there, and we'll have, or we currently have, issues with our own data internally, especially with Chinese walls between legal teams here that are not fully solved, which leads to that we cannot fully use that technology with all our data at the moment.
You know, I've seen the same thing myself, that once people start using this, they do they have this tendency, like, just push everything to it. Like, let's just have it like be the oracle of all things me and my firm. But yes, you're right. I think you have a very responsible approach in kind of, you know, metering that usage and being careful. So in the time that we have left, I'd like to talk a little bit about, you know, what the future holds. If we can predict it all based upon this kind of breathless pace of innovation, how things are going to play out, maybe even touching on how we think things will play out in terms of policies or ways of trying to control this evolution of artificial intelligence. Natalie, I'd like to go to you first.
Sure, thank you, Tom. And I certainly can't make any predictions, but I think we can follow what we've already seen happen, just replacing this with the trends in the past. And Tom, you had mentioned earlier this trend of disintermediation of legal services providers. So I'm going to continue to see that. And the problem in the US in some case types really can't get much worse. So we're not talking about attorneys that are leaving this space in droves. I think it's just going to potentially add a lot of value to consumers. I also think that the regulations around this, and I'll leave it to others to talk about regulations around AI in particular, but I think we can pretty easily predict that lawyers and bar associations in the US are going to start having conversations about whether this is legal advice. And we've been down this road before with online legal services providers. We're going to go down this road again, I think, with these tools. But I think in the US in particular, it's going to highlight how ineffective the current regulatory scheme is for legal information and legal advice. And I'm excited to have that conversation. And I think this is probably going to push regulators to a faster resolution, at least I hope so, in order to figure out how to re-regulate in the interests of clients. And finally, and on the disintermediation front, as we've also seen with respect to online legal information, we're seeing lawyers re-intermediate themselves and legal services providers re-intermediate themselves by coming up with new ways of providing legal information and monetizing legal information and having some semblance of legal advice maybe built in. And I think lawyers are gonna, and legal services providers are gonna use these tools to do that as well.
And I totally agree with you that this is also an opportunity for lawyers. You know, it's not just disintermediation. There's ways that they can take advantage of this. How about you, Alexander? What do you think the future holds?
Yeah, I'm already seeing the future in the sense that you know, the European Parliament, where now they are discussing the act, the draft. It had to be revised already because of this current developments in generative AI, because now they are discussing new concepts which were not on the table a year ago. Like, do we need a definition of foundation models, like something that's under the hood of ChatGPT and others? Do we need to discuss some particular regulation for general purpose AI because you don't know how it will be used, like in those cases, right? So it's already affecting regulation. And it's already affecting, I would say, it generates potential cases, in particular around defamation and around data protection. There are discussions around the legal basis for collecting personal data, scraping it to educate, to train the models. And then there are discussions on whether the chatbot providers or service providers in general are responsible for what speech their products generate, right? So I have a different perception, compared to most people. Most people are saying that they believe everything what the chatbot says. I think you shouldn't really consider it like a defamation if it invents something about a certain person because you've inputted a prompt and it continued your prompt like this. But this for me doesn't make sense. But we see that other people are taking a different stance about this, and I'm seeing that this is already being developed.
Yeah, you might think of suing your wrench because your car broke down.
Yeah.
Is that really the right approach? Henrik, what do you think? How are things going to play out? Be our sage.
I think somehow it might heal itself and solve problems it caused itself now. So for example, when we have problems with data protection at the moment, we'd get better tools directly and getting rid of the personal data and doing automatic reduction much better. So I think even if you say garbage in, garbage out, it might be that we have tools in near future, or they are already there, that we put the right data in to get the right data out again. And therefore, I think it could be a bit of a self-healing process. And what I said at the beginning, I think this whole AI bandwagon will really certainly push all the other things like automation and strangely also know-how and knowledge management. I mean, that's always a huge topic in law firms, and nobody was ever keen on actually providing that know-how documents and that stuff. And that should be things that should be getting much easier. I wouldn't say at a click of a button, but I think there will be some things that'll be pulled by that whole flow that's coming from AI that should make our lives easier. But again, I don't want to go with a long and more precise prediction because I certainly don't know.
Well, thanks, Henrik. And Daz, I'll give you the final word.
Thanks. So, I think one of the impacts is going to be just to how we as people are able to operate and to unleash the potential of our innate capabilities. One just very human limit is procrastination. A lot of us, me included, suffer from that. And then another one is creativity. And so there's some people maybe can get right on task, but it may not be like super creative. And all sorts of combinations of these things. I think combating procrastination and creativity are two out of the box capabilities of this technology. It can immediately, it certainly helped me a lot. And I think there's going to be impossible to predict benefits for individuals and for groups and for organizations that come from that as we unleash people's potential. In a more of a pedestrian way, I think we're already starting to see, and we're going to see a lot more integration with this technology into everyday applications we use all day long, and not just integration with, but integration into as part of the applications, and invisibly into the services and platforms that drive our applications and our work. A lot more domain-specific uses in Lawdroid, thanks to you, Tom, and Harvey, and on and on and on. A lot more in the pipeline. Education, I hope, is going to transform. Right now, law professors are scratching their heads, and as are high school teachers and everyone else in education, about exactly how to address this. I hope it'll be embraced and part of the curriculum. People know how to use this and what to use it for and not to use it for. Access to justice, we talked about. I guess personification will be the last one I'll leave you with. I just touched on these autonomous systems, but we're going to start seeing personification in various confounding ways of this technology. And so just be on the lookout for that. And I'd say what we have to look forward to is brighter days ahead. This technology is the best thing for law since, paper and pen. in terms of making it possible for us to actually do law in a better, faster, cheaper, and higher quality way. So put your seatbelts on. We're in for a great ride.
Well, on that note, I think that's a great positive note to end with. And I just want to thank you, Daza, Alexander, Natalie, and Henrik for being excellent, brilliant, awesome panelists, giving us all an insight into generative AI and how it's going to affect the legal business. So Holger, thanks again for bringing us all together. I truly appreciate it. And it's fantastic that we were able to bring together Europe and America today. So thank you. And thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of the day to everyone. And see you at the next ELTA Live event. Bye-bye.